It is 2015. The offices of Theranos in East Palo Alto look exactly like what a revolution is supposed to look like. Open floor plan, exposed concrete, the quiet hum of machines, framed magazine covers on the walls, Forbes, Fortune, Time. One of them shows a young woman with ice blue eyes and an expression that has no uncertainty in it, none at all. Her name is Elizabeth Holmes. She is 31 years old. She is worth on paper $4.5 billion. She has been called the next Steve Jobs, the female Edison, the woman who changed medicine. And somewhere in a laboratory 2 floors below those magazine covers, a technician is running a blood test on a Siemens machine, not the Theranos device that was shown in every demo, every investor presentation, every congressional briefing. The results from that test will reach a patient who believes Theranos ran it. They will not know what machine ran it. They will not know what the company actually is. We are going to tell them, but first, we have to understand what Theranos was supposed to be, because that is where the real story starts, not in the fraud, in the belief. Elizabeth Ann Holmes is born in Washington, D.C. in 1984 into a family with a complicated relationship to ambition. Her great-great-grandfather founded Fleischmann's Yeast. Her father held senior positions at Enron, yes, that Enron, before the collapse. She grows up understanding that position and image are not merely the byproducts of success. They are the mechanism of it. At 19, she enrolls in Stanford University's chemical engineering program. She is not a prodigy by the standards of the institution. She is, by all accounts, a focused, driven, socially deliberate undergraduate. But she has an idea she cannot let go of. People who knew Holmes in those early Stanford years describe a particular quality. Not the ideas themselves, but the certainty behind them. She did not present a hypothesis, she presented a conclusion. In rooms full of engineers trained to question everything, that certainty was disarming. Her idea is this: blood testing is broken. The standard model requires a vial's worth of blood, days of processing, and a cost structure that puts diagnostics out of reach for millions of people. Holmes imagines a finger prick device, a single drop of blood returning dozens of results in under an hour. She calls the company Theranos. In 2003, at 19 years old, she drops out and founds the company because Elizabeth Holmes does not just build a startup. She builds a persona. The black turtleneck, a deliberate homage to Steve Jobs, arrives in the early years and never leaves.
But we're building our company here, and we're building a group of phenomenal people.
The voice, naturally higher, is consciously lowered into a register of authority. The eye contact she maintains in interviews is practiced to the point of choreography. She is constructing a character. And the unsettling question, the one we are going to sit with for the rest of this video, is whether she knew she was doing it, or whether the character eventually became the only version of herself she could access. There is one more thing about those early years. In 2006, at a Theranos board meeting, something happens that a former board member would later describe, years after the company's collapse under oath, as the moment he understood what kind of organization he had joined. He does not use the word fraud. He uses a different word. By 2014, Theranos has raised more than $400 million. The company's valuation reaches $9 billion. $9 billion. For a device that does not work. The board. Elizabeth Holmes assembles a board unlike anything Silicon Valley has seen before or since. George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, James Mattis, William Perry, Sam Nunn. These are not technology people. They are the kind of names that make due diligence feel unnecessary. Because when George Shultz joins your board, the unspoken assumption is that someone already did it. People who sat in Holmes's investor presentations described a specific phenomenon. The pitch was not technical. It was emotional.
Our mission is to make actionable information accessible to every person.
By the time she reached the product itself, investors were not evaluating a device. They were evaluating whether they wanted to be the person who helped fix healthcare or the person who did not. The media amplifies it. Fortune, The New Yorker, the Clinton Global Initiative. The feedback loop between coverage and credibility runs faster than anyone's ability to verify the underlying claim. One investor would later describe the experience of meeting Holmes as singular, not because the science was compelling. He freely admitted he could not evaluate the science, but because the person in front of him seemed in a way he struggled to articulate, constitutionally incapable of lying. That observation would haunt him later. There was a word for what he was observing. He just didn't have it yet. Tyler Schultz is 22 years old when he joins Theranos. He is George Schultz's grandson. He is not supposed to be the most important person in this story. He is going to become it. The Edison device is real. It is manufactured. It sits in Walgreens locations across Arizona and California from 2013 onward. Patients receive results from it. Doctors make treatment decisions based on those results. The technology is extraordinary. The mission is genuine. The patients are real people with real conditions, and for the first time in their lives, they are getting blood tests from a finger prick in a drugstore. And they are going home believing they have been looked after by something new. This is what a revolution looks like from the inside. This is what it feels like to be part of something that is going to change everything. The Edison could not run most of the tests it claimed to run. So Theranos runs those tests on commercially available laboratory machines. Siemens machines. Standard diagnostic equipment. The kind of machines available at any hospital laboratory in the country. The employees who know this are placed under NDAs, so aggressive that several of them will later describe being afraid to speak to their own family members about what they are seeing. Internal communications show growing alarm inside the company as early as 2010. Patients receive inaccurate results for herpes tests, for HIV tests, for cancer screenings. A woman receives a false positive for HIV and spends weeks believing she may be infected. A man receives test results indicating he may have a prostate condition he does not have. Former laboratory employees who cooperated with investigators described a culture in which questioning the technology was treated as disloyalty. One former scientist described presenting data showing the Edison was producing results outside the acceptable range, and being told the engineering team would handle it. The handling never came. Did Elizabeth Holmes know the device did not work? The evidence says she was told, repeatedly, by scientists, by engineers, by board members who raised concerns. The counter-argument one her defense team would later make explicitly is that she believed the technology was progressing toward a goal she was certain was achievable, that she was not lying about results. She was lying about timelines, a distinction the jury would ultimately not accept, but one that is not as simple to dismiss as it might seem. When people inside Theranos begin to talk, the company's response is not to fix the problem. It is to seal the room. A major litigation firm is retained by Theranos. Former employees who raise concerns receive cease and desist letters within days of departure. Some receive them the same day they leave. Tyler Schultz is 22 years old and a recent Stanford graduate when he joins Theranos as an engineer. He is also the grandson of George Schultz, the former Secretary of State whose presence on the board has helped make Theranos credible. Tyler Schultz notices the data does not match. He raises it internally. He is dismissed. He raises it again. He is told to stop. He eventually contacts the New York State Department of Health with his concerns. Theranos hires private investigators to follow him. His grandfather, George Schultz, urges him to sign a non-disclosure agreement and stop talking. When Tyler refuses, the family relationship fractures. He is 22 years old. He is being surveilled. His grandfather, a former cabinet member, is asking him to be quiet, and he is paying his own lawyers from his personal savings because the legal machine threatening him is one he cannot afford to fight. The journalist John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal begins receiving tips in 2015. Theranos threatens the journal with legal action. Sources recant under pressure. Documents go missing. Carreyrou publishes anyway. The first Wall Street Journal story runs on October 15, 2015. Within 48 hours, the Theranos public relations operation launches a full counteroffensive. Holmes appears on CNBC, on NBC, in the pages of the journal itself, calling the investigation factually and scientifically erroneous. Reporters who covered the company during this period noted an almost surreal quality to Holmes's media responses. She did not appear defensive. She appeared genuinely offended, as if the investigation was a personal injustice. Several journalists described coming away unsure whether they had spoken to a sophisticated performer or a true believer who had lost access to her own uncertainty. Now, the board meeting in 2006. A former board member would later describe a presentation in which Theranos reported internal laboratory validation data for the Edison device. Data that, when independently examined years later, had significant irregularities. The board received the data and approved continued operations. The word he used under oath to describe what happened in that room was not fraud, it was not deception, it was not conspiracy. The word he used was performance. He meant it as a neutral observation. It did not land that way. In June of 2018, Elizabeth Holmes and her former partner Ramesh Balwani are indicted on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Holmes faces a potential sentence of 20 years. The trial begins in August of 2021, delayed by the pandemic. It runs for 4 months. The defense argues she believed that she was defrauded by Balwani, that she was a victim of an abusive relationship that distorted her judgment, that the technology was always on the path to working, and that she was not lying about its capabilities. She was describing a future she was certain she could reach. The jury deliberates for 7 days. On January 3, 2022, they convict Elizabeth Holmes on 4 counts. 3 counts of wire fraud against investors, 1 count of conspiracy. They acquit her on 4 counts related to patient fraud. The patient fraud acquittal will generate more commentary than the investor convictions. A jury of 12 people, having heard 4 months of testimony, decides that the evidence does not prove beyond reasonable doubt that Holmes intended to defraud the patients whose blood she was testing. That verdict is not an exoneration. It is something more uncomfortable. It is a jury saying, "We cannot see inside her head clearly enough to be certain." In November of 2022, Holmes is sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. She reports to a minimum security facility in Bryan, Texas in May of 2023. Legal observers noted that the verdict's ambiguity, guilty on investor fraud, not guilty on patient fraud, reflects something genuinely unresolved. Neither reading tells you whether Elizabeth Holmes knew she was lying. It tells you only that 12 people, having looked at all the evidence, could not answer that question to the required standard. Here is what we know for certain. Elizabeth Holmes raised nearly $1 billion from investors by describing technology that did not work. Patients received inaccurate test results from a device that could not produce reliable results for most of the tests it claimed to run. Employees who raised concerns were legally intimidated into silence. A company worth $9 billion on paper was worth, by the end, nothing. Here is what we do not know. Whether the woman who built that company was executing a calculated deception from the beginning, or whether she was a true believer who crossed a line she either could not see or refused to look at, and kept crossing it, and eventually became the fraud she had perhaps never intended to be. The uncomfortable thing about the Theranos story is not Elizabeth Holmes. It is the system that made her possible. The investment culture of the 2010s rewarded a very specific kind of certainty. The investor who asked too many technical questions was the investor who missed the deal. The board member who admitted he did not understand the science was the board member who was not invited back. The journalist who questioned the story too early was the journalist who got threatened with litigation. We built a machine that selected for exactly the behavior that eventually destroyed Theranos. And then we acted surprised when it worked. The question is not whether Elizabeth Holmes was a fraud. The question is whether she had any idea where the belief ended and the lie began. And the most honest answer available years later, after the trial and the sentence and the appeals and the journalism and the documentaries and the books, is this: we still don't know. And let us know in the comments, which dynasty should we cover next?